Their Fated Travels. Chapter 31. The Fighting Pit. Round 2. The next round started with a local pit fighter champion up against the dreaded Doomball captive. Even though it was weakened from its recent months of enslavement, it was still a powerful enemy. The pit fighter wasted no time by sticking his spear, part thrust, part throw, into the belly of the massive creature. It seemed that this only angered the Doomball as it raised its large weapon and brought it down towards its foe. The pit fighter managed to dodge out of the way, but had to abandon his spear in doing so. The offending weapon was still sticking out of the creature's stomach. The Doomball then snapped the spear in half as if it was a stick, leaving one end still lodged in it, and threw the other at the quickly side-pedaling fighter. The man was agile and aware enough of this situation. He moved out of the way, easily dodging the attack, and readied a new weapon to fight with. The Doomball lowered its head and snorted a bellowing challenge. The pit fighter roared back, less an attempt to intimidate his foe, as he knew he had no chance of doing that, but more to enforce his own courage. The bull creature came at him full charge. It wasn't going to give the human a chance to decide on his next weapon with care. The man reached out instinctively and grabbed the creature's large horns as the momentum of the beast pushed his feet into a slide backwards along the ground towards the built-up mud wall that was quickly closing in. He had no choice in the matter. He didn't have the strength to repel this thing, so he jumped off of the ground, leaving his body prone and picked up by the horns. The Doomball had the man over his head, hanging on as best as he could, while the great creature shook this way and that to get him off. The pit fighter reached for his short sword. One quick stab to the creature's head would likely finish it, he hoped, but that was not to be. His lapse of concentration in his reaching for the weapon allowed his grip to be free just enough for a sudden lunge of the creature's head sideways to send the man flying off. The pit fighter ended up in the crowd. He stood to his feet, half of him eager to get back in and fight, the other half considering submitting right now. Before he could decide, though, the great horn that meant the end of the fight sounded. The Doomball had been declared the winner by ring out. The human quietly considered this to be a good thing, while outwardly playing up his disapproval and upset just for the sake of his sponsor, who watched in dismay from the audience, tearing up his betting slip. Next came the strange mutant creature. It had been seen in the last round, and everyone was interested in seeing the strange pulsing organ on his back again. His opponent was a local Null man who fought bravely. He even managed to scrape his weapon into the mutant's face, deep enough that it exposed its cheekbone. The mutant's organ began to show beneath the ripped shirt, for it began to grow in size. The man ran at his foe to dispatch him quickly. The mutant fell low into a duck and bit into the man's shins, digging his teeth in and biting deeply to the bone. The man stared down in horror at the pulsing liver-coloured organ that grew in size up towards him. He screamed as the primal part of him that didn't understand what it was desperately wanted to get away. He submitted at once, but the mutant didn't care about that. It carried on biting the flesh on the man's legs. Heavily armed brawlers arrived in the pit and struck the mutant with a club until it let go. Then they cudgelled it, and it fell to the ground, squirming. While the attendants did their best to clean up the mess and lay new sawdust, a squeaking sound of rusty, sticking wheels caught everyone's attention. The audience went quiet. They remembered what happened the last time they had heard that sound. It was the dwarf again. Grimdall. He was once again strapped to the wooden platform and pushed in an upright position. The attendants saw this and fled from the ring as fast as they could. Grimdall was moving, straining to free himself from the bonds that held him. This was different from last time, but what made this all the more unusual was that his eyes were still very much shut, as if he were having some sort of bad dream of internal hallucination. His opponent was the favourite to win the competition, the Sewerjack. Such men would come from all walks of life. Criminals would sometimes even be permitted to join the organisation so as to evade a jail sentence. Some might consider this wrong, but the job they were doing was frightfully dangerous, and no one in their right mind would find themselves willingly wanting to be a sewerjack, patrolling the underpassages day and night, rooting out threats that lay down there, both human and otherwise. Just like the last time, the shady-looking slavers cut open a fresh wound on the dwarf's arm, and like before, applied the drug paste. The sewerjack did not have a clear shot to his foe. The handlers were still busy untying him. Instead, he ran forward and thrusted with his sword to finish the dwarf before the attendants could fully free him. Grimdal's red bloodshot eyes snapped open just in time to perceive the oncoming threat, and he roared with battle lust. The blade came in fast, but one of the dwarf's arms was already free, and he raised a hand to stop it, palm outwards. The blade impacted through the dwarf's hand and came out on the other side, but it was now stuck. Grimdal laughed, with froth beginning to form at the sides of his mouth. He pulled up a hammer with his one free hand, while the other, by way of impaling, was still holding the sewerjack's sword in place, and brought the stone hammer down on the man's arm. The bone crunched and broke at once. The elbow jutted at a terrible angle. He did not dare let go of his weapon, though. He struggled to free it. This only gave the maddened dwarf yet more openings of opportunity. The human grabbed a dagger from his belt and slashed at the dwarf's face with it. A mad cut had been made across its eyebrow, lower eye socket, and some of its cheek. Grimdal took one step backwards and swung the back of his hand now, low, like a swipe might strike someone about the face. Of course, this was the hand that had the sword stuck in it, and as the blow made contact with the sewerjack's hip, it impaled at the blade end. The forceful blow had lessened the weapon's strength of entry into the dwarf's hand. The jack screamed in pain and grabbed his sword. This time a strong tug pulled it free from the dwarf, who fought like he was possessed. Grimdal surprised his opponent once again, this time by spitting a huge globule of mixed saliva, phlegm, and blood into the man's eyes. As he desperately wiped it clear from his face, his vision cleared just in time to see both hammers in the dwarf's hands at last. He was gripping it as if there were no injury. The sewerjack could only watch in horror as the dwarf's muscles bulged as he brought both hammers together to meet the man's head, one at each ear. They impacted and sent him spinning in disorientation with massive external injury already visible. Then Grimdal swung again, like two massive chiming components striking a bell. This time, what little fractured skull held the man's head together gave out. His head collapsed like a watermelon in an explosion of blood. Grimdal roared and continued to strike at the man's body, venting much of his pent-up frustrations on it. This time the dwarf would not calm down easily. His injuries were helping to sustain the anger in him. Finally, the handlers emerged at ringside through the crowd and fired blow darts into their crazed captive. His swings became slower, and his roared, senseless chatter became slurred until he collapsed. Twice in one day this dwarf had been drugged and fallen unconscious. There were limits to what a body could take, even a hardy frame of a dwarf. The next bout was one of mutual respect. The unnamed Kislev-born warrior came up against Tordrad. Each competitor saluted one another, and some words were spoken in their native tongue. Nobody else present could understand at all what they were saying. In actual fact, Tordrad had called his opponent for a simple fight to first blood, a Kislev sparring tradition that friends and comrades in arms would often employ upon one another to train. His opponent agreed, and they were off. They weaved and dodged one another carefully, and even ended up in a blade lock using axes. From the test of strength this called for, Tordrad was the stronger, and he pushed his opponent backwards against the arena wall. There he brought his axe around in a swipe. The other man raised his weapon to parry, ready for a counter to slide off into an attack. But Tordrad had already read the man's stance, for his own blow had been a feint. He pulled the axe into a new arc, and as it sailed skillfully past the other man's guard range, it did some minor damage across his off arm. The crowd began to boo and hiss, as Tordrad's opponent lowered his weapon, saluted in the Kislevite manner, and submitted to the officials. Tordrad was victorious, but based on the jeering of the crowd, he decided not to stay around and celebrate his victory for long, so he retired quickly to the locker room once more, where he waited in silence for news of his next opponent. Next out to fight was the grey wizard, Taros. As he walked out, he was already casting a spell, calling for the shadows nearby to wrap about his body like a cloak. As his opponent, the pit fighter champion, made his way out into the arena, the wizard then disappeared. He was invisible. The pit fighter shouted in complaint. His sponsor shouted back to him to stop complaining and keep his concentration, but it was too late. Taros had seen his opening appear so soon and took it. The wizard re-emerged from the shadows behind the other man, sword first like a trained assassin. The pit fighter perceived the threat in time and swung around with his sword. Had the wizard been using the short blade or dagger, he would have killed the pit fighter with one blow, but Taros's thrust took too long. The man took the blade in his leather side armour instead. It pierced and did some damage indeed, but he was not dead. In response, the pit fighter brought out his gladiatorial-style net to further disadvantage the wizard's slower weapon. This was proven correct when he caught the wizard's sword in his net and countered with his own short sword in a stab motion. It went through the form of the wizard. It had to have been a killing blow. It had to, but no. The wizard dematerialized moments before impact, as if he peeled away from reality somehow. Now the pit fighter raged in frustration at his awkward foe, but within seconds the wizard had rematerialized again to the man's side, and in a running strike he slashed the man's shoulder, the one that had no armor pad upon it, in a deep gash, and as the wizard passed by once again, he faded into nothingness. The pit fighter began swinging his sword around him desperately as he clenched his shoulder with his other hand to try and stop the bleeding as best he could. Suddenly the shadows from the side began to pull themselves over to a position behind the pit fighter. This caught his attention as they formed up, and the wizard appeared once again. This time the pit fighter was looking over his shoulder and slashed around quickly with his sword. The weapon cut straight through his foe, separating the two halves. But instead of bleeding normally and falling apart, the two pieces of the Magister simply hung in the air. And where the split into the two halves had been made, instead of seeing gore and blood, there was a smoke-like substance, as if a cloud had been cut in half. Just at that moment the real wizard reappeared on the other side of the fighter and brought his sword around to the man's throat, pulling his hair, which forced his head back, thus exposing his neck entirely to the blade. The first version of Taros had been a visual trick, a clone of smoke somehow. The wizard spoke softly and calmly. "You have only one chance. I do not spare fools. Do you relent?" "I do," came the pit fighter's reply. With that he was pushed forwards and fell onto his face. He did not care, though, for he had his life. Next was the nobleman to fight, a second time, the Countess Emmanuel's cousin. About a half of the audience gave a cheer when his opponent was announced. Dieter Diath. Dieter came out with a shimmering effect visible about his person, a protective arcane armour. He was holding a magically conjured amethyst-coloured scythe. It was obviously not real and instead made of magic, based on the way it was semi-transparent. Smoke appeared from Dieter's hands too, at the sight of a previous miscast spell moments ago draining some of his physical and emotional energy. He dared not show any of this as a weakness to his opponent, however. That would not do. Dieter relished the idea of fighting again. The rage had built up inside of him, and he had a place to vent it, and had a chance to win some money into the bargain. What he didn't relish, however, was the concern that were he to kill this pompous, spotty-faced twerp, the Countess might seek him out for revenge. It didn't have to end in death, he reminded himself, but what if he couldn't help it? What if the other took over? What if... His line of questioning was interrupted as the posh, youthful-faced man spoke in a self-assured manner. "Just who are you supposed to be? You don't look like a fighter." Dieter snarled. "I'm a doctor." "A doctor?" came the man's reply. "You look more like you need a doctor." Dieter forgot all about his concerns at that moment, and channeled the winds of magic into his hands once more. These were the lower castings of magical essence, or the lesser lore as it were, but without the correct training of a magister this was still more dangerous than it needed to be. Dieter was used to this by now, however. He had lived in constant danger all of his life. The doctor in training moved through the air in a haze and seemed to disappear for a mere second, confusing everyone present, including his opponent, before appearing again behind him, from this a flash steps type spell. As Dieter plunged forwards, he sliced downwards with his conjured scythe, stripping the clothes and flesh off of the man's back with a deadly diagonal slash. He fell to his knees and he tried to clutch himself. Dieter spoke. "If you want to quit, then go ahead and quit, boy. But if you have a spine, then try to come at me. Though with that first strike, I think I can see part of your spine already." The man yelped in panic and screamed for help. He was only used to dueling, not such maniacal, downright dirty combat as this. He truly did not belong in such a place, but his opponent truly did. In fact, for all of Dieter's academic results and learned stances, a foul den of depravity where the lust of combat can be fulfilled was one of the only places he could let himself go. The headaches subsided here. The man slashed out defensively with his rapier, telling Dieter to stay back, not to come any nearer. Dieter was listening for the golden words of the man submitting, but he did not hear it, nor did the overseers, as the match continued. Dieter walked towards the man who lunged in panic at the oncoming doctor. Dieter ducked under the first strike, but the next was very precise indeed. The rapier slashed across Dieter's chest, slicing through the arcane protection too. Dieter was cut. The would-be doctor gritted his teeth together and charged. The man brought the rapier in again, a lunge for Dieter's face as Dieter had his face low in the charge. Dieter used the scythe handle to knock the rapier up and away from him, creating an opening to the man. He turned the motion of this into a rounded move of momentum and carried it around the long way. The man could barely bring the weapon back in time as the magical scythe tore straight through the rapier's blade and continued on, beheading the man almost completely. As his body fell, the head hung on by the nearest pieces of flesh. Dieter did not give up there. He cut the head off completely and held it up to the audience, who cheered fanatically at the bloodletting they were experiencing. This man they hailed as a hero to their entertainment needs. Dieter spoke to the head. "Do you give up now?" before throwing it up into the crowd. As the crowd parted to make way for the projectile, Maestro ducked as the head almost hit him. He spoke aloud rather impassionately. "Though you can't see me in the crowd, I could almost swear you were aiming at me!" Maestro had already been witness to much of Dieter's darkness and rage. He knew how the man could get. As for the wizard's proximity to such gore, well, he always reasoned it as such. If it is not my head flying along separate to my body, there's nothing to fear, and that's all there was to that. Dieter then dropped to his knees before the body, produced his surgical implements, and began to cut the man open. Very quickly he mutilated the body, pulling the heart out, and there, before everyone, he took a bite out of it, chewed and swallowed as blood dripped down his chin. The wildness in him was alive again. Only when others were dead did he feel most alive.